Hey Rob, welcome back again. And I believe today you were going to talk a little bit about, at least part of what you were going to talk about was people that have fallen off the wagon and how to help them get back on again. But from what I've been hearing from you, it's a lot more far-reaching than that. So why don't you just get going and tell us all about it?
Sure, Doug. Thanks very much. And I think, we've talked a lot about what people should do and what people need to do and what's best for people. And we've given so much good advice. And for a second here, what I'm going to do is take my doctor hat off and put on my fat guy hat. As you know, I topped out at close to 300 pounds. I'm down about 90 pounds. That happened about 15, 16 years ago. And during that time, I've had 3 major relapses in which I've gained more than 30 pounds back. In fact, I'm just now coming off a significant relapse from last year where I was 30 pounds. And it is incredibly difficult to sustain and keep going and get yourself back on track. That's why we refer it again, further emphasis on the fact that this is an addiction. If an alcoholic goes out one night and he gets hammered and he's been sober for a year or two and he gets hammered one night, it's really not such a big deal, except for one little problem. What happens tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day? They're drinking and drinking and drinking and drinking again. And that's the problem with addiction, is that it's not about one little slip. It's not about one little mistake. It's about giving yourself permission to do something and distorting the reality of everything you've tried to stay away from. And how do you get back on track? And that's why we consider our practice to be not a weight loss practice, but AA for fat people. So tonight, what I'd like to discuss are how to get back on track. What happens when you have a relapse? How do you quantify that? And then I also want to touch on some of the tools. And as keto has become so popular, more and more people are trying to monetize keto. And they're trying to sell us stuff. Now, some of the stuff is really good. Some of the stuff is a really, really helpful tool to help us to get back on track, stay on track, do better, do well. But there's also a ton of wallet biopsies out there. And part of what I want to talk about today is how do we help you to lose weight, treat your diabetes, live healthier without being ripped off or actually harmed. And I want to go through my thoughts on that. So let's first and foremost start with what we do when we have a relapse. And I think, you know that for us, this is entirely a substance abuse or an addiction problem. And what I'm going to talk about tonight reinforces the addiction component. So our philosophy is not a harm reduction philosophy, it's an addiction philosophy. In other words, the goal is as close to 0 carbohydrates as you can make it. There should not be an allowance in what you eat. And the reason for that is because if you carry cigarettes in your pocket and you say, I'm only going to smoke 2 a day, and life throws a curveball at you, of course you're going to eat more or smoke more. So the same happens with diets. If you have an allowance, if you can have a little bit, you can have some chocolate at night, you can have a little bit at night, you can eat up to 30 grams or up to 40 grams, or 10% of your diet can be carbohydrates. That means that you've got the carbohydrates in your local environment. And if they're there and life throws an emotional curveball at you, that's the well you're going to tap into. That's where you're going to go to. And you are going to relapse, particularly if the emotional issue that's driving you is personal. If it's something that targets your self-esteem and your self-confidence, who you are as a human being. And I've been through that personally. I've had times when I've been knocked sideways, particularly when it's devalued me as a human being. And I find that's when I'm the most vulnerable. And that's when I seek out drugs again. And obviously my drug of choice is carbohydrates. And I'll eat a tub of ice cream. I'll screw up. And you know what? As I said with the alcohol, that's probably not that bad, except I can tell you from personal experience, the next day and the day after that, it's a struggle. Because once you bring that crystal meth back into your life, not only is it there and giving you instant gratification, but on the flip side of that, why the hell should I go for a run? Why the hell should I interact with human beings when I'm feeling like crap and the only thing that's making me feel better is ice cream? I understand that. I understand the addiction side, and I understand and I live with the continuous consequence of a screw up. On the flip side of it, when I'm doing really well, I'm as emotionally buoyant, and I'm not bipolar. A lot of my patients are, and that's absolutely fine. It's not that's something we deal with all the time, but it's almost like I am bipolar in that when I'm doing well, I'm up there, I'm doing great. But it's amazing how, when you come from an authoritarian background like I do, how easy it is to feel devalued and to feel hurt and to feel beaten up by one stupid mistake that you make. So let's get into this. And I think if you look back at some of the previous chapters that we've recorded, I sent out a paper, and it was our starter guide. And on the bottom of that, it said, look, mistakes happen. What Weight Watchers does, they say you cheated, you failed, you're a terrible person, you're useless, fat people are lazy. I've heard all of that. And the way that devalues us, the way that the diet people challenge us when we make mistakes, when we screw up, it's awful. It is harassing the people that are most fragile at their most fragile moment. And it's a terrible, terrible way to go. However, on the flip side, let's face it, we make mistakes. All people make mistakes, and nobody quits an addiction the first time. The average smoker takes 3 to 5 attempts to quit smoking. So what we want you to be able to do, and the reason why we focus on this from an addiction perspective, is because addiction management is binary. You either did or you didn't. When it comes to an alcoholic, whether it's one sip of beer or a whole case of beer, it doesn't matter. It's crossing the threshold, distorting the mentality to grant yourself permission to have that first sip. That's the slippery slope when it comes to addiction. How much you have, how drunk you get, how high you get is irrelevant. It's crossing that threshold. And that is why in our program, we manage this from a binary or a substance abuse perspective where it's all about permission. And the reason for that is because you want to know without any gray zone when you stepped across the line. And there's never, ever, 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 ever a valid reason for a smoker to have a cigarette. There's never, ever, ever a valid reason for an alcoholic to have a drink. And there's never, ever, ever a valid reason for a fat person to eat a carbohydrate. And the only time a diabetic should ever eat a carbohydrate is if they're super low. So when we have that binary, yes, you did, no, you didn't, irrespective of the quantity, the reason for that is because when it comes to making mistakes, it becomes much easier to objectively recognize a mistake. And the first step of correcting mistakes is ownership. So if there's never a valid reason and you created some pretext by which you could have some, you can recognize that looking back. The question is, how soon after making the mistake do you actually recognize it? That time continuum is critical because it took me months after my first mistake to recognize it. Now, if I make a mistake, pretty much the next day or even the same day, I own it, I recognize it. I'm non-punitive because that's the Weight Watchers methodology. You're terrible, you're a bad person, you cheated, you screwed up. No, here's what I did. I objectify it. I made a mistake. It's done. I cannot fix it. I'm not proud of the fact that I did it, but I own it. And the more objective you can be, the more realistically you can correct it. So the 3 letters I'm going to use to correct mistakes is OAC. And we start with the ownership part. Yes, I made a mistake. I'm not proud of it, but it happened. I was doing the best I can. How can I correct it? The A stands for analysis. How did it happen? What were the circumstances that led to me making that mistake? Well, my wife tied me up with duct tape, shoved a funnel in my face, and poured Coke down my throat. Okay, that's a valid mistake. Other than that, there is no valid mistake. So if I made that mistake, I own it. I was traveling, I was upset, something happened. Whatever those valid reasons are, be analytical of how you justified and validated that mistake. Analyze the circumstances. You can't change what happened, but you're going to be in the same circumstance again. So own the problem, analyze what happened, and then come up with a corrective action plan. The C is for correction. So the next time I'm in the same situation, how can I handle things differently? What can I do the next time so that I don't get myself into trouble despite the circumstances? Ownership, analysis, correction. And one of the key things about addicts is we have lost the capacity to make a choice. We have retained the ability to make a decision. What's the difference? A choice is when you're faced with something right in front of you. You open the fridge, you're thirsty, there's a can of Coke, there's a Diet Coke. Which one are you going to have? You're probably going to have the Coke. If you're an alcoholic, you open the fridge, there's a bottle of water, there's a beer, you're going to have that beer. That's a choice. A decision is not to have carbohydrates in the house, for example. And if they're not there, you really can't access them. So decisions are preemptive. When you go into the store and you walk around, oh, what do I need? What do I need? You're probably going to buy a bunch of crap you didn't need. That's a choice. A decision is making a list before you go into the store and buying the right thing. If you're going into a restaurant or to a friend's house, you pretty much know what you're going to get. The decision is, okay, I'm going to have the roast chicken with some vegetables tonight. Or I'm going to have the burger without the bun and a salad instead of the fries. That's a preemptive decision before you walk into the restaurant. A choice is looking at the menu. What's on the menu? Crystal meth, crack cocaine, marijuana. Which one do I want? You're screwed. So getting back to making decisions about mistakes that you've made in the past and how you're going to correct them in the future. And if you repeat that in your mind and you go through that scenario again, it was Thanksgiving, there was a buffet, I went up and pigged out. Well, the next Thanksgiving or the next buffet, I'm going to talk to my wife, who I really trust, and she's going to go up and get me that plate of food. And she can pile it up, but I know that she's going to be better at me about not putting carbohydrates on there. So there's a little, and these are true circumstances. That is an absolutely true circumstance from Thanksgiving. So there are ways to mitigate against those mistakes, and you want to make corrections all the time. And one of the key things about the addiction model is we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for perfection, but we are looking for progress. And if you keep analyzing where you're making mistakes and you keep moving forward and you keep challenging yourself in an objective way, not am I terrible or a bad person, but I'm really, really focused on this. And yeah, I'm a rookie at this. I'm not going to be great at it right now, but I'm going to get better and better and better. You know how empowering that is, Doug, for your self-esteem and your self-confidence? Yes, you try not to make mistakes. You try to set things up that you don't. But when you do, if you can own it quickly, analyze what happened and correct it, you're back on track again, and you've learned from your mistake. So ownership, analysis, correction, always bear that in mind. And that's actually a model that applies to every aspect of life. When you have a conversation with someone and you screwed up, go back, analyze what happened, make the correction the next time. We can improve ourselves continuously. That's called progress. These are milestones along a journey, along a pathway. And that is critical. The next little paragraph that I want to talk about is, okay, I've made a mistake. How do I come back from it? I've done all the analytics, I've done everything, but I've blown keto, I'm back in my glucose high, my blood sugar is elevated, I'm out of ketosis. How do I get back? And one would think under those circumstances of relative negativity, I've said don't be negative, but in reality, you want to mitigate against the negativity, but there's still going to be that, I'm a little upset with myself. So how do you get back? The starting point, the beginning, is not to say, okay, today I'll quit again, because that's a negative, and you're not going to be successful, particularly if your self-esteem and your self-confidence has been dinged. And let's face it, every addict comes from an extremely low self-esteem and self-confidence perspective or point. And even when they've built that up, it's still extremely fragile. So how do you start? You know how you start? You go out and you do something that makes you proud. You go out and you do something that makes you proud. Go for a walk. Help a homeless person, buy them a meal. Go to church if you haven't been for a long time. Paint, sing, draw. Do something cool that makes you feel proud of who you are. Activate that hey, I am okay. I got this. From that position of pride, you are going to be far more effective at tolerating the austerity of starting a ketogenic diet again, of removing those carbohydrates again. So I can tell you the very first thing that I do after a screw up or a relapse, and for me, it's even small little things. For example, if I hadn't planned to have, let's say, breakfast, and I very rarely eat breakfast, and there's a day when it comes, and even if the breakfast is completely keto, but if I ate breakfast when I shouldn't have eaten breakfast, that's not a punitive thing, but I say to myself, hey, dude, come on, man, you know better. Tomorrow, let's skip breakfast. But in order to get back on track, do something that makes you proud. And for me, it's almost always going for a walk with my dog. The length, the time, the strenuousness, irrelevant. It's just about going for a walk with him, getting into that zone, into that meditative space where my brain can process a few things, and I can come back with emotional buoyancy. And really what we're talking about here is emotional buoyancy and emotional resilience. Critically important factors. So once I come back, I can then initiate getting rid of the carbohydrates once more and getting back on track. And there's a particular little algorithm, if I've gone out of ketosis, that I use to get back in. And it employs something that we've been doing for 20 years, way, way before the word intermittent fasting even existed. Basically what I do is a 24-hour cycle where it's sugar-free clear fluids only. No calories. Because remember, the very first step of this process is to empty your liver of sugar. The liver has a lot of glycogen in it, and you want to empty your liver of sugar. So the first step is to allow your liver to release what it's retained in the form of glycogen back into your bloodstream, and then your liver is going to say, hey, I need energy. And it's got two sources. It can tap into your mouth or it can tap in your fat stores. And if you're not putting anything in your mouth, it automatically starts tapping into your fat stores and it reinitiates ketosis. And you can do that quite readily within 24 hours. So the first step, in fact, I'll either do a 24-hour or a 23-hour. That means I'll have my dinner last night and I'll go all the way through to dinner tonight. That's 23 hours. And I'll eat for maybe 20 minutes during that time, and usually fairly late at night. So I do sugar-free clear fluids only, no calories, 0 calories, or maybe 1 calorie or 2 calories if I'm going to drink a Coke 1 or something like that. But really what you want to go to is as close to 0 calories as you possibly can in your drinks. And you stay on that till your dinner. Your first dinner should be a high-fat, no carbohydrate, ultra-low protein vegetarian meal. And the reason for low protein is because your liver is trying to replenish its glycogen stores. And you really don't want to give it protein as a substrate to do that. So for me, that may be a leafy green salad with some olive oil, cheese, maybe a bit of avocado in it. It might be a creamed spinach recipe that I have, which is kind of my little protected recipe. It's a high-fat, very low-protein recipe. But I stick to that high-fat. It may be a bowl of vegetables, of leafy green vegetables with some butter in it, put in the microwave. But it's a high-fat, very low-carbohydrate, very low-protein vegetarian meal. And then I do the next day, right after that dinner, I do another 23-1. So you do back-to-back 23-1s. Again, the whole day you're drinking your sugar-free clear fluid. In my life, that's black coffee. And then the next night, your second dinner is a high-fat carnivore meal. It might be a cheese omelet. It might be a big ribeye steak. It might be some dark meat of the chicken with tons of skin, maybe some mayo. Might be a pile of bacon. But you go for the high-fat vegetarian meal. You reintroduce some protein into you. And I can assure you those 2 days will get you into deep ketosis. And then after that, the third day, I then go, some days I may just stay on a 23-1 for an extra day, or I go to an 18-6 or a 16-8. 2 meals a day. Try not to eat, to consume any calories in the morning. Stick to my coffee. Ride the wave of ketosis as deep into the day and get back to a structured format where you are having 2 meals a day as late in the day as you possibly can. And by the way, it's absolutely fine to eat just before you go to bed. So the way that I get myself back into keto control, I hate the word control, but it's keto control, is number one, I start by doing something where I can feel the pride in myself. Some endorphin action that makes me feel good about myself. And then it's back to back to back 23 ones. Sugar-free clear fluids, first meal, high fat, low protein vegetarian meal, second dinner, high fat, carnivore meal. Third meal can be either of those two, either a 23-1 or two meals as a 16-8 or a 18-6, if you know what I mean by that. And if you can stick to that structure and every single day get out there and do something that requires time and effort and makes you feel good. Do something new, challenge yourself to get back into action. As I said, whether it's going for a walk, going to church, reading a book, singing, writing some music, writing a story, I don't mind what those are. Getting out in the yard and doing some weeding. Get out there and do something that makes you proud. That is the way we get back into keto control. And as much as you want to own the mistakes, you own the mistake, you analyze what happened, you develop a corrective action plan to correct that mistake, and then you do the keto control, you can get yourself back on track on a regular basis. And that's essentially the principle that we use. I have a sheet of paper over here that is our Gaining Keto Control Plan. Doug, what I will do is send it to you. I'll email it to you, and you can post it along with this video. It's a standard thing that we use for our patients. So it's a very, very effective thing. And it really is about emotional resilience and getting back on track both emotionally and from a dietary perspective. Okay, so now let's talk about people who have repetitive relapses. People who really, they put the effort in, they struggle time after time, and they really try, and they just keep screwing up. And you know what? That's not a punitive thing. That's not a terrible bad. You're not an awful person. I've very, very seldom met somebody who is fat and lazy. And yet everybody out there that looks at us and says, oh, you're just fat and lazy. You're just lazy. Not true. Nobody tries harder than an addict to deal with their addiction. Yes, we may have language that is cursory and that is contemptuous and defensive, but we hate being fat. And I know personally how miserable we are and how desperate we are and how afraid and how anxious we are that it's not going to work again and again and again. And when you've tried and you've tried and you've tried and you've struggled and you've lost weight and you keep coming back and you become that expert at failing weight loss programs, eventually you get to a point where you say, screw that, and you see some ad on TV or some ad somewhere or some friend tells you this thing worked or that thing worked, and you buy into it hook, line, and sinker. Most things don't work. There is no replacement for hard work when it comes to dealing with an addiction. There is no replacement for austerity and deep introspection and connecting with yourself at the most primary level, where you connect with a person whose self-esteem is in the toilet, who feels like crap about themselves. But you can rise up from there. And while people around you can show you the path that you need to walk, only you can walk the walk. So when you start this out, start with a simple low-carb, high-fat diet. Don't buy into gimmicks. Don't buy into pills. Don't buy into powders and potions and shots and shakes and all other kinds of crap that prevent you from going through the eye of the needle. Every day I get patients, oh, the phentermine works really well. Oh, this thing, just write me a script for this. And just those things prevent you from making the addiction correction. Yes, there are times when we use them. Yes, there are times when we use those things as tools to help you with your struggle, but they don't replace the struggle. They don't replace the hard work you need to do. And skinny people will never, ever understand how difficult this hard work is. People that have never had an addiction struggle to understand. They may be empathetic, they may be sympathetic, they often condemn us. So please, 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 please keep your wallet closed. Don't spend money on crap, not to begin with. Down the road, they may help you a little bit. But oh, the bullet coffee gets me right into ketosis. Oh, these medium chain triglycerides are great to get me into. It's not about getting into ketosis. It isn't about getting into ketosis. That's dietary thinking. That fails every time. It's about your mindset. It's about getting your mind right. It's about making a commitment not to anybody else but to yourself and saying, damn it all, I've got this. Yes, you can use some of those other things to help you along the journey, but don't use them at the beginning, because this isn't about being in ketosis. This is about getting your mind right. And it's such a difficult thing for people to understand. I'd rather you struggle and fail than get yourself into ketosis and say, ha, 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 I'm fine. Because you know what? Those first 10 pounds mean squat. They mean nothing. Anybody can lose 10 pounds. Anybody can lose 20 pounds in a very quick hurry. Just go on TV and buy into any diet out there. But where are you at 1 week? Where are you at 2 weeks? Where are you at 3 months, at 6 months, at 10 months, at a year? That's what I care about. There's a great study by a guy called Dansinger that was published in 2005 in JAMA. And he looked at 4 different diets. And he looked at how pathetically people followed those diets and how little weight loss they had lost by the end of a year. It was something like 6 or 7 pounds by a year in people in a strong study. So please be aware that those diets don't work. This is a mindset game. It's a commitment game. It isn't a keto or a nutrition game to begin with. Yeah, they're formulas, but it's your brain that has to get into this. It's what you give up and what you change. It's about the divorce and the deprivation. That's where it starts. In order to get into the success phase, that's the eye of the needle that you need to go through. Okay, so let's go on. That's the starting point. Now, along the way, okay, I'm struggling. I'm doing okay. I've gotten the keto thing going. I've made the commitment. I'm moving along. But man, I've just had relapse after relapse after relapse. That's when you might want some help. That's when you may want some help. Occasionally, I'll use a medication like phentermine. There's tons of medication. They're all watered-down medications. Occasionally, I'll use phentermine for a couple of days to help to deal with appetite. I know people are going to be very upset with me for saying that. The goal of phentermine is as a rescue medication, not as a medication to be on so you don't have to do work. The same thing is true with some of the keto-type potions out there. The MCT oils, the bullet coffee. They can get you into deeper ketosis, but don't start there. So some of those things are okay to use, but then there's a bunch of, and I'm using my favorite medical word here, a bunch of bullshit. South Beach diet. Oh, we're struggling. We're not getting any members. We've now got a keto option. It's a low carb, low carb, high protein diet. That's what South Beach is advertising on the radio, on TV. Dudes, that's not keto. That's not keto. Okay? So understand what it is. In fact, I want to get away from the word keto because just like paleo and Atkins and all those others, very well intentioned, but completely bastardized by people who made it up as they went. The goal is to be low carbohydrate, high fat. That's actually not true. See, everyone says, yeah. No, it's not true. The goal is to be at 0 carbohydrates. The goal is to be at 0 carbohydrates, even though that is not necessarily attainable. That's the goal. It's not about giving yourself permission to move forward. So your mindset always has to be, I'm going to eat no carbohydrates today. And then be very aware of the incidentals in some of your vegetables, a little bit of whole milk or cream that goes in my coffee. I'm aware of those incidentals, but that is not a gift to myself. That is not a treat. That is not something I'm eating up to. So just be very, very aware of the addiction mindset versus any diet that tells you can have a little bit. Okay. When it comes to protein shakes, when it comes to all these protein powders and things, or protein bars, they're not protein bars, guys. They're ice cream chocolate bars. They're chocolate flavored shit. Flip it around, look at the back, look at the box on the back, and look at one number. If I can implore you to look at one number, it is the word that says total carbohydrates in the little nutritional box on the back. And if they are positive, It's crystal meth. That's your test. So almost all of these chocolate bars on the front, especially the old Atkins ones that have now exploited Dr. Atkins' great message. 2 grams of net carbs, 1 gram of fiber. We don't count this, we don't count. Your body doesn't do that kind of math. Your body doesn't do that kind of math, and certainly your brain, the addict over here, doesn't do that kind of math. So when the purists say, oh, this doesn't get absorbed, that, it isn't just about my gut. It's about this guy as well. So if I want a chocolate bar, they make it okay for me to have that chocolate bar that says 2 grams of net carbs. And you flip it around, there's 26 grams of carbs on the back. In the writing that's so small, I can't even see it with my glasses on. The test for me is this. I don't have a tree in my backyard that grows a chocolate bar. I can't pluck that from the ground. I can't pluck that from a tree or a bush. And I certainly, sure as hell, can't shoot it or fish it out of the ocean. So one of the premises I have is, if this thing didn't have a life, and I can look at that piece of food and tell which animal or plant it came from, it's probably not okay for me to eat. And all these aids, all these shakes and bars and juices, and get rid of them, guys. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. They don't work up here, and they certainly don't work below that. Okay, so typically, those are what I call wallet biopsies. Those are people trying to monetize something for which, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of money in it. There's not much money in eating properly. There isn't a lot of money in eating healthy food. So when people say, oh, I'm poor, I don't, yeah, that's okay. There isn't a lot of money in buying and eating real food. When we manufacture stuff, we do it cheaply at a profit. So please be aware of that, okay? A Big Mac at McDonald's costs more than a whole roast chicken at Walmart. So we buy into it. Fast food is cheap food. No, it's not. It's not cheap on the front end. It's not cheap on the back end. So even if you're poor, you can still eat very comfortably for less than $10 a day in this country, and elsewhere even cheaper. Okay, so now let's talk about what I do for a living. You see what these are? These are scrubs. I'm a surgeon. I operate on people. And the people that walk into my office for the first time are almost always people who've given up. They've tried everything. They're experts at failing weight loss programs, usually the traditional calories in, calories out, diet and exercise programs. They've tried them all. They're at their wits' end. They're upset, they're down, and all they want to do is lose weight. All they want to do is lose weight. Well, remember, I am better at making people lose weight than any other specialty on the face of this earth. Yeah, I said that, and I mean that. My specialty, bariatric surgery, I can make people lose all their weight. In fact, I can make them die from starvation. Not that I choose to do that. But the point is, bariatric surgery is the most powerful weight loss option that you have, period. The most massive amount of weight you will ever lose is after bariatric surgery. Unless, of course, I lock you in a dungeon and throw away the key. That's a slightly different option. But beyond that, bariatric surgery, obesity surgery is the single best way, fastest way to lose weight. It's called comfortable starvation. You don't feel hungry and you can't eat. So why the hell doesn't everybody have bariatric surgery? Why do I bother with keto? Why do I bother with all these talks about what people should and shouldn't be doing? Here's why. Bariatric surgery is by far the most powerful form of weight loss. But obesity isn't about weight. Obesity is like a polluted river. You can go to the water's edge and take all the crap out. You got a whole bunch of hands and you can take all the garbage out of the river on any given day. But until you shut the factory down that's dumping the shit in the river, you're never going to have a clean river. And no surgery addresses the cause of obesity. Obesity is a substance abuse problem. It's a carbohydrate addiction. And no surgery fixes that. And I believe it is malpractice. Yes, it is malpractice for my colleagues in bariatric surgery not to understand the concept that 100% of their patients are drug addicts. That's a very, very important concept, because yes, surgery is the most powerful way to lose weight. But one of two bad things will happen if you don't address the cause. If you don't talk to the patients before and hold their hands down the road of the journey. The first thing is the majority of those patients will gain their weight back, because the effective durability of surgery, balloon, band, sleeve, bypass, duodenal switch, the effective durability where that operation is actually causing weight loss is anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. Nobody loses more weight after a bariatric surgery after 2 years unless there's a complication. So yes, you lose a massive amount of weight, but what happens after 2 years? By far the majority of patients gain their weight back. Some or all of that weight comes back. Maybe not in the first 2 years, but by year 3, year 5, the majority of those patients have gained a substantial amount of their weight back, because guess what? It's just another failed diet. They haven't addressed the cause, the behavioral side. On the flip side of that, gastric bypass and duodenal switch are the most profound forms of comfortable starvation. And there's a lot of those patients that can't eat enough. They just can't get enough calories in. They can suck back as many milkshakes and smoothies and crap that they want to, but it just runs straight through them. They can't absorb it. Because basically a gastric bypass, and certainly a duodenal switch, is where you sew someone's ass to their mouth. Okay? Think about that. You've got this metabolic surgery where basically everything you eat just runs straight through you and you poop it out. Yeah, you poop out the calories, you lose the weight, but you're also pooping out the nutrients. And 100% of patients, 100% of patients who have a gastric bypass or a duodenal switch, no matter how healthy they eat, by virtue of the operation will become malnourished. Either at a micro or a macronutrient level, they will become malnourished. And I do not believe that those operations should be done in human beings as a first offering. I'll use them from time to time, rescuing patients, and about a third of my practice is basically rescuing patients from the complications of their surgery or of themselves. So as a backup, yes, sometimes we have to resort to that, or if they've had the operation, we can make corrections to it because they often go wrong. But please, please, please don't be sold a gastric bypass or a duodenal switch as your magic bullet because it's the best operation out there. Yeah, it's the best operation out there for transient weight loss, but you got to think beyond obesity. And for the rest of your life, you don't want to go from being fat to being miserable and malnourished. So understand that. There are very, very few circumstances where it's okay to have that as a first line. The operation that I love the most in 2019, 2020 is the sleeve gastrectomy. It is purely a restrictive operation. It reduces how much you eat, and for a period of time, it gets rid of hunger. It just takes that hunger away. So you eat small amounts of food, you stay full for a long period of time, and from a caloric perspective, you lose a lot of weight. It's very consistent. It is beatable, but it's very consistent. The other cool part about the operation is what you put in your mouth, you save. What you put in your mouth gets absorbed. There is really no malabsorption. One or two little things that we have to watch for, but there really isn't any malabsorption. But the problem is this, that if you don't get put on a low carbohydrate diet, let's face it, 80+% of the calories that fat people eat are carbohydrates because they're drug addicts. Okay? So if you can eat a huge amount of food and a percentage of that is healthy for you, has decent nutrients in it, then you're probably okay. But when you can only eat this amount of food and most of it is crap, now you're becoming malnourished. So a lot of our sleeve patients or sleeve patients that we inherit from other practices where the doctors just said, oh, stay away from drinking Coke or stay on a low calorie diet or drink your protein shakes. Not only have they regained a lot of their weight back 3, 4, 5 years ago, afterwards, a lot of their illnesses have come back and they've beaten the system. It's not the surgery that fails. Oh, my surgery failed, my band failed, my sleeve. No, the surgery doesn't fail. The surgeon failed the patient because they didn't educate them about the addictive nature of carbohydrates, period. And I know I'm probably a little ahead of my time right now, or at least I like to think so. But I think after 20 years of preaching this message and of seeing the differences with thousands of patients, It is incumbent upon a surgeon, when they take that person's life in their hands, to not only operate on them, on their bodies, but also understand and help them with their minds. Otherwise, you should not be doing the operation. And I'm pretty adamant about that. And I've been treated like crap by my colleagues for that message. But I have to turn around and rescue their patients time after time after time after time. The NIH just published a great paper because all the surgeons now are saying, oh, these are diabetes operations. These are diabetes operations. They're great for diabetes. Gastric bypass, far better than any medication for diabetes. And I agree with them. I agree with them. Gastric bypass will put your diabetes into remission no matter what you do. Far better than any medication that the ADA has on their list of medications. Because medications do not fix diabetes. They just slow down the progression of the disease. So diabetic medications do not do anything to help people with their diabetes. However, so what's the dichotomy here? Sorry. What's the dichotomy here? Here's what it is. After gastric bypass, you're eating a very, very small amount of food and you're dumping the simple sugars. So your and I hate the word, but your glycemic index foods change. Your absorption of carbohydrates changes. So your blood sugar doesn't spike as high and your diabetes gets better. It goes away. Magically, it goes away. I've seen people with A1Cs of 4.3, 4.4. You cannot attain those A1Cs without that surgery. However, those patients are not educated to stay away from carbohydrates. And an addict will always find a way to their drugs. So here's what happens. They may not be able to eat ice cream anymore because they feel like crap. But if you take some toast and you crumple it up, or if you eat some oatmeal, and oatmeal is always healthy for you, isn't it? Because it's natural steel grain cut, whatever the hell carbohydrate it is. Or your bananas or your fruit smoothies. And what they do is they educate themselves and figure out ways around their surgery. The NIH published a paper, I believe late last year, that over 50% of patients who have a gastric bypass for type 2 diabetes are diabetic again within 5 years. Now you've had your intestines completely disrupted, you've had your arse sewn to your mouth, and your diabetes has come back, even if you're not heavy. Because you can't eat the calories. But if a high percentage of the calories that you do consume are carbohydrates, your diabetes comes back. Your weight may not, but your diabetes does come back. A little bit like professional athletes or endurance athletes who eat a lot of carbohydrates and burn off the calories. But on top of that, those gastric bypass patients are profoundly malnourished. And it's when Humpty Dumpty falls of that wall, yeah, you can put the pieces back together again, but there's still fault lines. You cannot fix the problem. To my mind, if you're going to have surgery, I would start with a sleeve gastrectomy. Yes, it still requires hard work. So again, just like before you take any medications, before you take any powders or potions or gimmicks, what the doctors are going to do is put you on a low-calorie diet, the surgeons, and get you to lose some weight before your surgery. That's ludicrous. The whole bloody reason you're going to have the surgery is to lose the weight. Don't focus on the weight when you're having surgery. Focus on the behavior. The surgeon's going to take care of your weight, but the surgeon cannot take care of your brain. Own the addiction and begin to work, make changes from an addiction perspective. Start getting rid of the crap in your life. And then if you need help, do the surgery. So when patients come into my office, we have the discussion, we have the addiction discussion. My first discussion is always the carb addiction discussion. And then, okay, this is real food. I'm looking for you to, in a stepwise way, like we've talked about in the previous chapters, I want you to initiate this process. And although we're going to work towards surgery, you're definitely going to have surgery. I'll tell my patients this when they come in. You are absolutely 100% going to have surgery. But if you're doing well, we can kick that ball down the field. And we can keep postponing your surgery. And maybe you'll only get your surgery after you're dead at 98 of being run over by somebody texting while they were driving down the road and you were going for your run. So commit to the surgery. So it's always available to you instead of regaining all that weight back. But let's work with you. Let's see if we can prevent that surgery. Let's see if we can kick that ball down the field for the rest of your life. But if you need it, we'll make that decision. And how do I make the decision? I make it for my patients when they're really struggling, but I want to see the effort. The worst thing you can do is operate on a patient in lieu of them putting in the effort. because you can guarantee that they're going to lose weight. You can guarantee they're going to gain it back or die trying. So you've got to partner with your patients. I don't want success or perfection. I'm looking for change. I'm looking for progression. The other group of patients that I will operate on, and fairly aggressively, are those that are going to die of their addiction. Nobody in their right mind would ever withhold Narcan from a blue heroin addict. No matter how committed that addict was to change or addressing their addiction, because you want to save their life. So if I get a patient coming in that's had several heart attacks, that's really struggling, if I get a patient that comes in that's a very brittle diabetic or an uncontrolled hypertensive patient, I will offer them that surgery as a life-saving rescue. And I have no qualms about that. But the contract I have with that patient is let's work really hard on that. And if the condition scares the shit out of them, they probably are going to work at making those changes. So I look at surgery as a very, very powerful tool to help patients who are struggling to help themselves, never for patients who can't help themselves. So it is a powerful tool, and I know that what I've just said now, particularly in the purest world of the keto people, is very controversial. And I'm not there to operate on everybody. I'm not there to give people an easy way out or anything like that. These are tools that you can use that are effective and safe to use in a journey for a small fraction of people. But I will stand up for that all day long, as much as I am totally committed to the addiction management. You will not deprive the alcoholic of antabuse. You will not deprive the heroin addict of Narcan. You will not deprive the smoker of Chantix or a Nicorette patch. This is the Nicorette patch of a diabetic or of a obese person, but use it wisely. Don't waste it. Nobody puts a nicotine patch on and continues to smoke and hope they're going to quit smoking. That's ludicrous. And yet that's what these surgeons do. Stay the hell away from those surgeons. If a surgeon puts you on a low-calorie diet, they have no clue about what obesity is all about. So please stay away from them. Now, let's talk about some intermediary things. There's something called an intragastric balloon. It's a balloon, it's a round device that we put into the stomach that blows up in the stomach and can stay there for around 6 months to a year. FDA in this country, 6 months. Europe is about a year for one of the types of balloons. I'm very comfortable keeping those balloons in for 6 to 8 months, up to a year. What do? The balloons pre-fill the stomach so that you only eat a small amount of food. The food gets retained in the stomach for a long period of time. You don't feel very hungry, and you reduce your caloric consumption. It's a forced diet. Because all CECO diets, calories in, calories out, it's a forced way to reduce your caloric consumption to lose weight. Very effective for a short period of time. The way I use the balloons, again, is for sustained behavioral change. I will not put a balloon into somebody who is not committed to a low-carb, high-fat way of life. But if they need help with sustaining it, because ultimately behavioral change comes from breaking habits and reforming new ones. It's about breaking habits, sustaining the break until the habit is no longer part of who you are, and creating new habits that you practice every day until they become part of the fabric of who you are. And successful patients, and these are the balloons are typically for people with around 50 to 80 pounds to lose, or for people that are very brittly diabetic or hypertensive or have some serious illnesses that they need to, in a sustainable fashion, change their eating and drinking behavior. Maybe someone with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and PCOS, by the way, is 100% direct consequence of chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption. So if there's a woman out there who's having fertility problems and she can't get pregnant, and the doctors diagnose them with PCOS and they've put them on metformin and a few other medications, it ain't going to help. It's about sustainably staying away from carbohydrates. We have no problem in our society paying $100,000 for fertility treatment. Oh, but you mustn't have a balloon. If I can get you to change your PCOS ways, first of all, when you do get pregnant, you're less likely to have an autistic child. That was chapter 9. At the same time, you're going to lose weight, you're going to be healthier, your fetus is going to be healthier, you're going to have a better quality of life if you can come off the carbohydrates. And if the balloon helps you to do that, so be it. So the intragastric balloons have value, far better value than a lot of the shakes and shots and the phentamines and the other drugs that we put people on. Is there risk to them? Very small risk, yes. But they are valuable tools that we use from time to time, but don't jump to a device. Use it to embrace the keto option or the LCHF option more effectively. And typically what I do with my patients is I try to work with them to do the LCHF behavioral change as often as they can, as much as they can. And if they have a couple of breakdowns, then we start talking about the possibility of a device. Don't come in and say, I want a device. You're not going to get it from me. Go down the road, or there's some guy under a bridge just up the road from my office that's selling magic out of a Publix Wagon. Publix is our local grocery store, because there ain't no magic. There's no shortcut. You want a shortcut? Go to the plastic surgeon for liposuction or cool sculpting. And ultimately, the only weight that you're going to lose is the few $1,000s out of your back pocket. You ain't going to lose any more money or any more weight. So all those people that have cool sculpting, that have the tummy tucks, that have the liposuction, what you're treating is this. It's just another high. If you've lost a lot of weight and you've got a little lump of fat somewhere that hasn't gone away, and that's a genetic deposit, sure, go ahead and have that sculpted away. Are you're this big and you want to lose weight? It ain't gonna work, guys. You're just pissing your money away. And I work with a plastic surgeon. I work with them. They will convince you over and over and over again to put money on the table, and they're smooth as silk. It's a wallet biopsy. Is there value to it? Absolutely. Absolutely there's value to cosmetic surgery. Makes you feel good, but not from a weight loss perspective. Stay the hell away from it. And they promise you something for nothing, except a few dollars. It doesn't work. This requires effort. And if you're not willing to put the effort in, don't put your money into the hole. So there are so many vulnerabilities to being fat. And the monetized world out there knows exactly how to take advantage of us fat people. They will cash our checks day in and day out, and they will take our money and destroy our self-esteem. The single best thing you can do, listen to these podcasts for free, make a decision, put the effort in. It requires nothing but salt water. Sweat, tears, and salt water is always a great drink. So you put the effort in, you don't need to spend the money. And if you're putting the effort in and you need a little bit of help, use a tool or find a tool at the lowest level that is going to help you to get over those few hurdles. But the most important thing is do no harm. Do no harm. Develop strategies for helping yourself to get out of holes that you put yourself in. You know what's very interesting, Doug, is that we went through prohibition in this country 100 years ago, before you and I were here, because alcoholism was such a big problem. And even though prohibition limited the amount of alcoholism, it was still very prevalent. And then two guys, I think the guy's name was a Dr. Bob and a Mr. Wilson, got together. And they said, let's develop a program to help individual peoples to help themselves to quit drinking alcohol. And they started a little thing you may never have heard of called AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. For alcoholics, by alcoholics, non-monetized, except to the point that it's monetized to support itself. They don't advertise anything, they don't sell anything, except members to members. And it's a grassroots program. And you know what? Physicians, doctors are not involved in that, because we're going to be bantering about, oh, this science and that science, and there's no bloody science about alcoholism. It's an addiction. Here we are after years and years and years of being obese and diabetic and having PCOS and lipid problems and spending billions of dollars on a variety of things, and there's no consensus, nobody can come together. What I love about what you're doing, and I think we need to take this to the next level, why can't we develop something called AA for fat people? And it's not OA. It's not OA. Overeaters Anonymous is a failure by definition, because every addiction is managed through abstinence. And the best OA can come up with is food. You're addicted to food. Well, by definition, you can't stop eating food. And the problem isn't food in the first place, but you can't stop eating carbohydrates. So when an alcoholic says, oh, I quit drinking, no, they didn't quit drinking, they'd be dead. But everybody knows they quit drinking alcohol. We need to be able to establish, multi-centered throughout the world, small groups of people who are there to help each other, not gimmicked, not monetized, not showboating, not using a whole bunch of crazy ideology, but simply returning back to the way human beings were designed to function. And that is mental health that uses time and effort to deal with our emotions, helping people to cope better and develop better mental health coping strategies that in little increments elevates our self-esteem and self-confidence, and a removal of the most toxic of all the drugs on the market right now, carbohydrates. And if we can adopt a similar grassroots program, we can forget about all the doctors and all the science and all. This is so damn obvious. And if you don't believe me, do a personal experiment. Take a 21-day, do a 21-day experiment on yourself. Cut out carbohydrates for 21 days and see what happens. It's very simple. I've never, ever met somebody who had liability from doing that. And I've been doing this for 20 years. So the best science we have about this approach is every individual that tries it. Yes, you may fail, you may struggle with it, but why can't we collaborate and help people? And people that have been doing this for a while longer help each other, just like AA. Again, I know that's a pipe dream because it's got to be monetized and it's got to be done by doctors and it's always consult with a physician first. Do you think every alcoholic that goes to AA consults with a physician first? No, they don't. They hit rock bottom, they're drinking, they're struggling, they find help. They find a sponsor and they go through a program that restores who they are as human beings. And I believe that that is the way we need to go. This is my soapbox. So we've got a small group of doctors that debate and discuss all the pseudoscience, all this nutritional science. And I wrote this the other day, and this has been the last little thing that I want to read to you from something I wrote a couple of days ago to my group of physicians who are frustrated and angry at all the keto naysayers. And here's how it goes. It's about science, it's about studies, it's about humans in nutrition. In all caloric human nutrition studies, any studies regarding nutrition and calories that are done in humans, the major flaw is the assumption that human subjects will behave like rats in cages. As scientists, we do all our work with animals and rats in cages and cells, at least the early stages of these studies. But in a rat in a cage, you can control their diet absolutely. You see, all these diets follow the harm reduction model. You can have a little bit, but you can't have a lot. And the expectation of all human studies is that the subject will follow the dietary guidelines absolutely, and that they will reduce the index food, whether it's a low fat or a low carbohydrate, whatever the diet is, no meat, whatever the diet is, that those subjects in the study will follow the index diet absolutely. But as long as you're dealing with fat or diabetic people, and you give them a small allowance, they can have a little bit. You can have 20% carbohydrates. You can have 30 grams of carbohydrates. You're asking someone who has no control over a relationship to tightly control the relationship. And for a while, they may be motivated to do that for a short while. But even when controlled as tightly as possible, unless you lock those human study subjects down, unless you put them in a lockdown, like they did in World War II with what's called the Minnesota study, there really is no effective validity because you cannot measure what those people really did. And when you cannot measure what those people with type 2 diabetes or obesity do, especially in studies that are over a month in duration, then the results by definition are meaningless. Because you're trying to compare what this group did and this group did and compare the two groups. But if the two groups begin to overlap beyond the boundaries of those separations, how the hell are you going to extract data? Because to ask these subjects who follow a lifestyle of chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption, and that's what causes their disease, you're not going to change that because they're eating for pleasure, not nutrition. And even in my own patients who are highly motivated, who have had surgery or working towards surgery, they struggle. I struggle. And nobody's more motivated than me as a fat guy. So how can I expect subjects in a trial to do what they're asked to do? Because by definition, these people have lost control of their relationship, and they're not trying to do it on purpose. And again, I feed back to the Danziger study of 2005 that showed parity between 4 different types of diets, from low carb to low calorie to high fat to high carbohydrate diets. They all had about the same weight loss, but the most important number in the Danziger studies, nobody really followed the diet beyond about 3 or 4 weeks. And that for me is salient data. So doing harm reduction nutrition studies is like taking a group of alcoholics and asking them only to drink 2 beers a day for 2 months or 6 months. And then at the end of the 6 months, believing that that's what they did. Even when you use an addiction model in the public sector with these subjects, it's still very challenging because relapses occur even in inpatient addiction treatment centers. So how do people do out in the world out there? Well, having participated in these studies as a doctor, I have personal knowledge of how impossible it is to draw conclusions without bias. Most commonly, when you interview these subjects, they tell you, well, I cheated here, I screwed up there, I didn't really follow the diet completely. And here's the amazing thing. What these very researchers do, what they should do is disqualify that subject. But they don't disqualify them. They ignore the results of the interview. So they don't disqualify the subjects because if they disqualify the subjects, they'd have no subjects for their trial, and their trial would be meaningless and they wouldn't be able to publish their paper. So the subjects that screw up should invalidate the trial, and yet they keep them in. They make excuses. They ignore them. They have a blissful ignorance about the fact that their subjects in effect negated themselves, and they continue to draw study conclusions based on the erroneous data. And the conclusions of those studies typically follow the lines of the original hypothesis and support the original, the researcher's original bias, whether that is a low-carb doctor or a high-carb doctor or a DASH diet doctor or whatever it may be. That is why these nutritional studies clash. That is the prime reason why these nutritional studies have no validity. The single humanistic study flaw negates almost all the science that comes from longitudinal human studies. In fact, the very concept, for example, of the glycemic eating index, David Jenkins, guy was on my committee for my PhD. He's the guy that invented the glycemic index in 1981 in rats in cages. Glycemic index is where different types of sugars cause your blood sugar to rise up at a higher level, at a higher rate. If you're a rat in a cage and you're giving them what they eat, absolutely you can control that. You can't do that in the public. So the reason why the glycemic index diet, which is the current standard diet for diabetics, fails miserably is because they can't do it. And yet we've got study after study after study from animal models where it works. Sure, it does in animals. Put me in a cage and absolutely I can make that happen. But we're not rats in cages. So getting our underwear as scientists in a knot about the quality of bad science and this study doesn't, this study, it serves no purpose other than to perseverate confusion. There's a great ad from the Royal Bank of Scotland, and I urge you all to do this. Just to Google RBS, RBS of Scotland, Heimlich. And it's a group, the ad is a group of people sitting around and one guy sitting there choking and everybody's discussing the Heimlich maneuver and how you should do it and what happens, and this guy choking. And up jumps a person from the other table, does the Heimlich maneuver, the guy spits up a chunk of food and his life is saved. And the way I look at all these scientific arguments that we see every day in the news media amongst our scientists, it's exactly that. We're a bunch of people sitting around debating this and debating that while America is getting fatter and more diabetic. We can discuss whether alcohol is harmful forever, or we can create AA for fat folks, like Wilson and Smith did in 1935. That's what I alluded to earlier on. The most important thing about AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is that it works. The most important thing about AA is that it works. It is consistent throughout the world. It is by alcoholics for alcoholics, and it removes the esoteric healthcare system from the equation. And it specifically precludes monetization. As long as we use harm reduction methodology, irrespective of the caloric formula for weight loss, it is destined to fail. Doing the same thing over and over and over again, diets and diets and diets, and expecting a different result. Come on, man. All because LCHF, all because some diet is LCHF, it's a keto diet, it's a low-carb, high-fat diet, it doesn't mean that it is suddenly effective. It doesn't mean that it suddenly is sustainable. It requires an addiction approach. Until we approach carbohydrates using an addiction model for the people, by the people, in an AA fashion, I do not believe that we will ever effectively deal with this problem. In fact, if you examine your own diet right now, doesn't it more resemble an abstinence model rather than a control model if you're already a keto evangelist? Doug, I take you. You're on an addiction protocol. I know you've never been a fat guy, you've never been a diabetic, but you're as much into keto as, let's say, a religious Jew or a religious Muslim doesn't eat pork. It's just not in their wheelhouse. Or as a vegetarian doesn't eat meat. Why can't we recreate the same thing for carbohydrates? Why is it so difficult? Vegetarians do it every day. Religious people do it every day. They exclude things because they choose to. That's the model we're after. So we get a whole bunch of people telling me it's not an addiction, when in fact they're following themselves an addiction model. All my colleagues. All these people whose breath stinks of ketones. They're not cheating here and there. They're not having a little bit here and there. So, yeah, this is probably going to be the last podcast before we write our book. I think I've covered most of the territory. There are a few other little things. But I just want to get a message out there. And I think it's going to be very important to conclude and hopefully motivate a few people in their own neighborhoods to get together in their HOA clubhouses, to get together in their churches, which is where AA started, to get together even in their doctor's offices and have small groups and help each other to be strong, to get off carbohydrates. That's it.
Yeah, no, that's a great message. I was just about to say, careful what you wish for, because if we go after this, it's a lot of work. I know all the spare time you have, right? So,
but Doug, it's what I do every day.
Yeah, but I mean, to take it to the next level, somebody's got to do it, though. So,
but I think the best people to do it is little groups.
Yeah.
You know, AA meetings sprung up everywhere, and the people make the time.
Yeah. So
the problem is that everybody's trying to coach everybody else and make money off it.
Yeah, I've got one of the ladies that is part of our community that she actually spoke in one of the breakout talks in San Diego last year, and I'm sure we'll get her to talk again this year. Her name's Jess Dudley. Mm-hmm. And she kind of specializes in managing and teaching people to create small groups. So, let's tomorrow I'll try and reach out to her, and maybe we need to sit down and talk together and see, maybe we can, talk is cheap. But let's sit down and actually try and do something.
Sit down, make it happen. And I think, that for me is the most important thing, where you get one or two people, and the beauty about AA is you get people at different levels. There are people that have been sober for a long time, people that are just starting, and it's a great model. I'm not totally a 12-stepper, but the setup, the format of how it's structured of AA is an excellent concept.
Yeah. Well, we should look at it and see what we can do.
And I think that
I just want to go back quickly, like right near the beginning. You were talking about diabetes, and you were saying there was only one time when a diabetic might eat some carbohydrates, and that's when they go really low, when they get really hyper.
Correct.
And I'm assuming you're talking about type 1s in that situation, right?
2s as well. 2s on insulin as well. Anybody using insulin.
Okay. So it can happen. Is this like when they're on severe amounts of insulin, their pancreas is really shot, or is it any?
No, Doug, if I injected you with insulin right now, you'd go low.
Okay. And then I'm going to have to eat all carbohydrates.
Right. And if your blood sugar is 40 or 50 and you're feeling like crap and you're sweating and you're cold and clammy, yeah, you need sugar.
Okay.
And what I typically try to get my patients to do, instead of drinking orange juice or taking a glucose tablet, is to drink some whole milk. But yeah, you can go low. And the other place you can go low is what's called postprandial hypoglycemia, when you've still got insulin resistance and you eat a small amount of carbohydrate, but you get a huge insulin response because it's trying to overcome the resistance, and you're getting better. Then it plummets your blood sugar too low. So I don't want to tell people never eat carbohydrates and have some person dying of hypoglycemia. Right. So, but the only time it's legitimate is if your blood sugar is measurably low. Not when you feel low, but when you stick a needle in your finger and you see that it's low, less than 60 probably.
Right.
Then I think it's reasonable to bring it back up with sugar. But then also what you do is you say, okay, how the hell did that happen? And how do I make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, exactly. Prevent that from happening again.
Yeah.
Okay. You had this OAC sort of treatment protocol. Okay, so you've got, what's it? The O's observation,
ownership analysis, correction.
Correction.
Yeah.
So if you had to summarize what's required in that correction phase, how would you summarize that?
Well, you figure out, so for example, okay, we went on holiday or we were driving a long distance, I had to stop at McDonald's. What could you have done differently? Could you have stopped at Bono's or a barbecue place and gotten something? Could you have stopped at McDonald's but had gone into the restaurant instead of driving your car, taken the bread off, had a burger and the salad? How do I fix that? Right, so the correction is making the commitment, figuring out what the correction is, so the next time they're going on a long trip. Okay, I'm going to be driving for 4 hours to Jacksonville. Can I make it there without drying up and blowing away from anorexia? Maybe I can just take a cup of coffee with me and drive. Maybe if I have to stop, where can I plan that ahead? And it's usually about planning. If I'm going to a buffet, how do I figure that out? If I'm going to friends' houses, how do I figure that out? If it's my birthday, or if someone comes to me, it's your birthday, I baked you this cake specially. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one.
Pam
and I mean, and you keep pointing out that I'm not an addict like you, which is true. But, I mean, when we were first implementing that, it still wasn't
challenge, of course.
Especially when we went somewhere, to friends, to family or whatever. And we got into a habit of taking a little Ziploc with dried horse, and basically like a dried sausage, right?
Right. There's your correction.
And some macadamia nuts or something in a bag.
Right.
And everybody started tucking into the cake and stuff, and we take a couple of handfuls of nuts and some biltong and
exactly right. You go to a barbecue and the vegetarian will often come with their little veggie burgers.
Right.
Yeah. So they do these.
They prepare
That's just part of that. And I guess the word that I use there is called arrogant integrity. If you're proud of the fact that you don't eat sugar and starch, and you're arrogant, a little bit arrogant about it, it's much more easy to say no than if you're in a deprivational state. No, I'm not allowed to have that.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that in earlier chapters.
That was how we were. We were proud of what we were doing,
Yeah.
and proud that we were achieving it.
Right.
And yeah, so we would sort of eat that macadamia nuts, like not hid away in the corner, but sort of
here they are. Do you want some? Have some.
Proudly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know that, so that is that arrogant integrity. And anybody that has that dietary discretion, as I said, the vegetarians and the non-pork eaters, or the Jews and the Muslims, those are two groups that we see all the time. That there's just nothing that'll convince them to do the wrong thing, because it's not part of their mentality. And you could eventually get there. You know, you can eventually get there, and without hurting a lot of people's feelings. So, but a lot of people say, oh, you know, I had to taste the cake. Okay. If you didn't have to taste the cake, how are you going to deal with that the next time they offer you the cake? Maybe you preempt and you say, look, this year, instead of taking me out to dinner, let's go to a movie. Or instead of buying me the cake, buy me some flowers. You know, whatever it may be, you can preempt stuff, and that's the decision versus choice. But also, if you're in that situation, somebody's going to get hurt. What I tell my patients all the time, somebody's going to get hurt. Either the lady that bought you the cake is going to get hurt, her feelings hurt, or your diabetes is going to hurt you. Your choice. And you can gently say, no, thank you, without having to taste it or without having to pinch, or, you know.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, I mean, the reason we're doing this episode is because a lot of people
we make mistakes.
Those are the people we need to help. So
yeah. And it's usually because I know the times that I've screwed up, and the times that I'm most fragile is when I feel a little bit Trump-like. And what I mean by that is, when Donald Trump sends out a venomous tweet, it's because somebody activated his personal anxiety. They challenged him as a human being. And then he puts out this venom and that's when I do the wrong thing to myself. I turn it in. And I'll soothe myself with a drug. But it's usually when you're already a little bit fragile and something awful happens. And you take it personally. That's the challenge. You know, when I'm feeling vulnerable, when I'm feeling in a bad shape, and some arsehole cuts me off on the road, I'm going to vomit out some road rage at him. If I'm feeling good, I'll say, dude, off you go. You know, don't make your bad day my bad day. So a lot of our mistakes happen around an emotional sinker rather than emotional buoyancy. When you're feeling like crap and something hits you, your day goes sour very quickly, and you mitigate that with carbohydrates. So it's what I talk about. The words I use: emotional buoyancy and emotional resilience. You got to be able to bounce back from getting hit, rather than hitting to the fridge and the pantry. And it's tough. I mean, those are just the little things. And for example, in the AA model, that's when you call your sponsor. Say, dude, listen, I had a shitty day today. And I'm thinking of using again, and they talk you down. And it just takes that 5 or 10 minutes or half an hour chat with somebody to say, hey, no, I've got value. What is the opposite of too little?
Too much?
No. The opposite of too little is enough.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And it's something that I talk to my patients a lot about, is that all too often, we just feel deprived. We feel downtrodden. We're not proud of ourselves. There's nothing there. And the message always is, you know what? I am good enough. I'm okay. It's not I'm perfect. It's not I'm brilliant. It's not I'm the best ever. It's not about being successful or being great at what you do or wealthy. It's just about, hey, I'm good enough. And one of the challenges when you don't feel that you are good enough, that's when you use. Anyway, I mean, that's the psychology side of it, but it's a critically important part of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And just having someone to talk to that says, dude, you're doing okay. We all go through this. You know what? But you're doing okay. You can get yourself back on track. They just need their hands held a little bit.
Yeah.